Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Graphic Thoughts Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Panel, with my co-host, Crypto the Superdog, being really loud in this panel.
This is the 30th episode of the Graphic Thoughts Podcast. Pretty hyped about that. And it's a pretty big episode. We are doing Shazam prior to DC Comics buying Fawcett Comics and getting the rights and likenesses of all those characters. Basically, everything that's in his canon, origins, his secondary characters, his main villains, all of these characters are going to be introduced in the Fawcett Comics. And you'll see the character grow, and then obviously once he gets to DC, they change some stuff. But for the most part, Billy Batson Shazam has relatively stayed the same. And I'm really excited to jump into it. Shazam has been more recently in my life, honestly, one of my favorite characters. Within the last 5 years or so, I've been reading a lot more DC than I did when I was younger. And there's a lot of really cool shit that he's done. And then I really liked him in the first Injustice game, him being the voice of reason for a minute to get fucking murdered by Superman. I thought that was cool. He's a really cool character. He's a lot of people, and he did get inspiration from Superman, so it is fair, but a lot of people just compare him to Superman. And obviously, prior to DC owning Fawcett Comics, there was a big thing with them trying to sue for him being like Superman, but obviously that's not really a thing you can do. But that's enough yapping. I'm excited to jump into it. I wanted to thank everybody who's been listening to all the episodes recently, wherever they are. I will be trying to do a little bit better at making sure I post on like Instagram, Facebook about upcoming episodes and what's upcoming and happening, because I'm not very good at that. But that's enough yapping. Let's jump right into the Shazam episode 30 of the Graphic Thoughts Podcast. Alrighty, so like I said, we're going to be jumping into basically everything Shazam before DC. But before we get into the actual anything of that, I think it's important to talk about where comic books are at the time of the story coming out. Obviously, it's a bit different than your average comic book story. That's not what I'm going to say. It's a bit different than comic books are now. In 1938, Superman debuted in Action Comics #1 and completely changed comic books. And this is why I have said for many years that Superman is the greatest superhero, because we literally would not have superhero comic books like we have them today without Superman. And you can try to argue that a different hero would have came down the line and done the same thing at some point, but we can't prove that. We can't prove that Superman did do that, though. Before Superman, comic books were mainly Western dominated. Western, like cowboy kind of Westerns. Detective stories were very popular as well, and then funny animals and newspaper strip reprints sold well. Think of Garfield, think of Flat Stanley, think of that weird fucking dog I can't think of the name of. But after Superman became a sensation, basically every publisher wanted its own superhero. Everyone wanted a piece of that pie. And one of those publishers was Fawcett Comics. Fawcett Comics was another relatively big comic book publisher at the time, which until then was better known for more of magazines or magazine style books rather than a superhero comic book. But once again, like I said, after the success of Superman, many superhero genres and or superhero comic book strips wanted to capitalize on that success. And that led directly into the creation of the character of Shazam. Shazam, straight off the gate, was very much inspired by Superman. You could tell by just the way the character is portrayed. And a fun little fact, he was actually bigger than Superman for a brief period. There was a time in the early 80s, in the early 1930s, or 1940s rather, that Shazam was more popular than Superman was. His books were out selling Superman comics, Batman comics, Avengers, Captain America, everything about that time. Not Avengers, what are thinking of? The writer of the original Shazam comic books is a writer named Bill Parker. Bill Parker was asked to invent a new superhero. His first idea wasn't one hero. It was 6 separate heroes, each representing a mythological or historical figure. Eventually, the concept evolved instead of 6 heroes into a single child that could magically transform into one powerful adult hero who possessed all 6 abilities. This became, obviously, Captain Marvel or later Shazam. The artist for the first couple Shazam, or for the first lot of Shazam, was artist C.C. Beck. He redesigned Parker's concept. Instead of a dark, serious hero, Beck drew bright colors, clean artwork, exaggerated expressions, and a very friendly smile. Captain Marvel looked powerful but very approachable. The visual style became one of the defining features of Fawcett Comics later on. And then this leads us into the actual original debut of Captain Marvel, which was in Whiz Comics #2 in 1940. Readers met Billy Batson. Billy wasn't a superhero, he was a homeless newsboy wandering the streets. One night, a mysterious stranger tells him, "Follow me." Billy enters an abandoned subway station. An empty train appears. No conductor, no passengers, and it carries Billy deep beneath the earth. There he finds 7 giant statues representing humanity's greatest moral failings: pride, envy, greed, hatred, selfishness, laziness, and injustice. Beyond that sits the ancient wizard Shazam. The wizard explains that he has spent thousands of years searching for someone pure of heart. Billy has been chosen. When Billy says, "Shazam!" lightning strikes. Billy transforms into Captain Marvel, not a teenager, but an adult. Tall, muscular, confident. The wizard dies almost immediately after passing on his power, leaving Billy as his champion, as one with the abilities. We learn the meaning of the word Shazam, the name of the wizard, and later on the name of the superhero himself. The S stands for Solomon. Solomon stands for wisdom. H is for Hercules. Hercules is for strength. A is for Atlas. Atlas is stamina. Zeus is power. Or Z is Zeus. Zeus is power. The other A is Achilles. Achilles is courage. And M is Mercury. Mercury is speed. Unlike Superman, whose powers come from biology, obviously Superman gets his powers from the radiation from the yellow sun. On his home planet, he is just a normal person. He's not powerful. He doesn't have these abilities. Captain Marvel's powers are basically just magic. This distinction would become important decades later when he fought Superman, because, as we know, Superman is weak to magic. That's another thing. I know this is off topic, but I hate this argument that, oh, Superman can only get hurt by kryptonite. There's nothing else that can hurt him. He's literally susceptible to magic, and some of the most powerful people in DC are magic wielders, so fuck all the way off with that. Anyway, why readers have immediately loved Billy Batson? Captain Marvel offered a fantasy that Superman just couldn't. Children didn't imagine, what if I were Superman? They imagined, what if I could become Superman? Billy Batson was the reader. He was the child that you're reading about that became the superhero. Every kid could picture saying one magic word like Shazam and becoming the world's strongest hero. That idea was absolutely revolutionary, and people very, very much grabbed hold of that. And like I said, that is what led to him, for a brief period of time, being more popular than Superman, Batman, Captain America, every other Submariner, every superhero that was out at this period in time. He blew out of the water for this brief period of time just because of how easy to connect it was. I'd say argue that it was very, very before its time, in similar to the Peter Parker Spider-Man kind of thing. Obviously, him being younger in high school, and that's about the age you're going to be getting into them, or a little bit younger than that, you're going to be getting into the books, so you'll be having similar life experiences and stuff of that nature as you're reading the story, which gets you closer connected to the character. This is, in my opinion, a similar kind of thing, with them making the character initially so young. You're reading it as a young kid and you're like, I could be this guy. I just say Shazam. Sorry, I've always loved that he just yells Shazam and that's how he changes, and that can become this powerful thing. We get introduced to Dr. Savannah. I'm not actually running through book by book. I'm just running through the important things that happened prior to, obviously, him being introduced into this world. We're going to take breaks in between to talk about... We'll get to there. We get introduced to Dr. Savannah. Very quickly, Captain Marvel gained his arch enemy, Dr. Savannah. Unlike Lex Luthor, Savannah wasn't handsome. He was tiny, bald, nearsighted, a scientific genius. His inventions included death rays, shrinking machines, robots, giant monsters, flying machines. His motives wasn't simply power. He believed the world rejected his brilliance. Many later comic scientists owe something to Savannah. A lot of people, he was a very good example of a much more complicated villain at a time when the villains weren't very complicated. Like I said, the character, Captain Marvel, the character is absolutely exploded in popularity. He soon starred in Wiz Comics, and then eventually Captain Marvel Adventures became one of the best-selling comics in the world. With some issues reportedly selling well over over a million copies. At his peak, Captain Marvel rivaled at the time surpassed Superman's popularity. I've already mentioned about 5 times because I just think it's cool. We get introduced to the Marvel family. Obviously, this is another very big thing because this is one of the first family dynamic superhero families that we really got. This was even before the Fantastic Four, obviously. So I'd even argue that a lot of superheroes' biggest families owe a lot to the Marvel family. Fawcett quickly expanded the mythology. Captain Marvel Jr. was introduced. Freddie Freeman is critically injured. Freddie Freeman obviously is Billy Batson's best friend. I say obviously, I don't know why I haven't mentioned that previous to this. I guess he wasn't super important prior to this. But after Freddy gets injured, Captain Marvel shares part of his magic. Freddy becomes Captain Marvel Jr. Unlike Billy, Freddy remains physically disabled in his civilian form. This made him one of comics' earliest heroes with a permanent disability. Probably, I'll just stick to one of the earliest because I can't actually say for certain, but I'd think he probably would be the first, if I'm not mistaken, fully disabled superhero, or that went on to be disabled, or went on to be a superhero. Fun little fact about Captain Marvel Jr. Elvis Presley was actually a very huge fan of Captain Marvel Jr. and even modeled aspects of his stage costumes and hairstyle after the character. I find that fucking extraordinarily cool because Elvis is extraordinarily cool. Billy later discovers his twin sister, Mary Marvel. She gains similar magical powers. Unlike Billy, she doesn't transform into an adult, she remains herself. This made her one of comics' earliest major female superheroes. Also, still to this day, one of the youngest, probably. Obviously, with the Teen Titans and teams of that nature, Young Justice, they do have pretty young people, but she was definitely one, if not the youngest at that time to really ever be one. We get introduced to the Monster Society of Evil. Then came what? This was written by Odo Binder. The story lasted over 2 years. It introduced Mr. Mind, a tiny alien worm. He looks harmless. In reality, he's one of the smartest villains in comics. I might use a thumbnail for him for this video because I do think he's cool. He's basically just like a little caterpillar looking motherfucker. He gathers dozens of villains into one organization. Captain Marvel fights monsters, robots, dictators, aliens, dragons, and magical threats. The serial ran for more than 20 chapters, making it one of the earliest long-form superhero sagas that has ever been made. And it absolutely was extraordinary in popularity. It was still absolutely killing it. People loved Shazam. And why he became so popular. By the mid 1940s, Captain Marvel Adventures was selling extraordinarily well. The Marvel family had multiple successful books, a live action movie serial was released, radio programs and merchandise expanded beyond anything they could possibly have imagined. For a brief period, Captain Marvel was arguably the biggest superhero in America. But that success attracted attention. And I do believe I briefly touched on this in the opening. But then came the Superman lawsuit. DC, then the National Comics, believed Captain Marvel copied Superman. They argued similarities such as flying, incredible strength, cape, costume, secret identity, and certain story elements. I will say right off the bat, you really can't get away with suing somebody over something like this now. There's so many Superman clones out there now. It'd be so fucking ridiculous. Homelander, Omni Man, fucking the other guy that was the Superman clone in Invincible thing in the beginning. I forget his goddamn name. He came back after getting killed. There's so goddamn many. I can't remember the one, but there's the one where the evil Superman turns evil and just starts killing all the other heroes, and they're trying to figure out what the fuck's happening. There's so many. So I don't actually think it could very much happen nowadays, but back then it was a pretty big deal. The legal battle lasted for years. Fawcett initially won some decisions. Appeals continued. By the early 50s, superhero sales were declining across the industry, both DC, Marvel, and Fawcett. and any other comic book company that was out at the time. Eventually, Fawcett decided continuing the lawsuit wasn't worth the cost. In 1953, Fawcett settled the case, agreed to stop publishing Captain Marvel comics, and shut down its superhero line completely. From 1953 to 1972, this is in this entire time we did not have Captain Marvel. We basically lost this very popular character, even with superhero sales and everything dying at the times, comic book sales, everything of that nature. Some of these certain heroes still stayed relatively popular. Superman was popular, Batman was still popular. As popular, there's a reason these characters are still around today. They were still popular. For nearly 20 years, 1953 to 1972, no new Captain Marvel comics were published. During this gap, the original Fawcett hero disappeared from newsstands. Fawcett exited the superhero business, and Marvel Comics eventually introduced its own unrelated Captain Marvel. And this is why we don't have Captain Marvel, Shazam, named Captain Marvel anymore. So it's a whole really weird thing. And actually, it's less weird when you think about it when it was happening, because back then, because when I was a kid and I thought about it, I was like, why would DC create a character called Marvel or Captain Marvel? I know Marvel is marvelous, but when you have a competitor named Marvel Comics, but they were not named Marvel Comics back then. They were named Timely Comics. So it makes a little bit more sense. Marvelous, that works. Marvel made their own Captain Marvel, or Captain Marvel, later on Captain Marvel, trademarking it for comic book titles. In 1972, he was brought back. DC licensed the Fawcett characters because Marvel Comics now owned the Captain Marvel trademark for comic titles. DC could not publish a book called Captain Marvel or refer to the character as Captain Marvel. Instead, the comic was titled Shazam. Inside the stories, the hero was still called Captain Marvel for many years, so I fucked that up. For whatever reason, I thought he couldn't be called it in the book, but I literally wrote here in my notes that he was still called it for a long time. But it wasn't until 2011 did DC officially rename the character Shazam in universe. And that's when we got the character back, and he's basically continued on into what we have now. We got the 2 live action movies. Second one wasn't the greatest. First one was pretty good. We got Billy Batson in Injustice. We got a whole bunch of stuff. We got a lot of really cool stories since then. Billy Batson is one of my favorite characters. I didn't read it when I was a kid. Obviously, I wasn't young enough to read it when he was coming out. And then when I was young, it was mainly just Marvel comics that we had around the house. I didn't read a whole lot of DC comics. But I think the Fawcett era of Captain Marvel is extremely important. It basically introduced everything that matters, and still to this day, people know about the character. The Fawcett version of Captain Marvel established, like I said, nearly everything fans still associate with the character. Everything that you think of when you think of Captain Marvel or Shazam, you think of it came from these books. Billy Batson saying Shazam, the Wizard Shazam, the Rock of Eternity, Dr. Savannah, Miss or Mary Marvel, Captain Marvel Jr., Black Adam introduced in the Fawcett era, but I didn't mention him. Mr. Mind, the idea that a child can transform into the world's mightiest mortal. Although DC has modernized and revised the mythology over the decades, the heart of the character still comes from those original Fawcett comic stories in the 1940s and 1950s, which I think is really cool because they do tend to change and fuck shit up. So I think it's cool, even like New 52, everything of that nature. He's basically still always came from relatively the same thing. They'll change the story a bit, but it'll always be Billy Batson. He'll always be a boy, and he'll always become the most powerful hero in the world. And I think that's the way the story is supposed to be told, and it should always be told. Before I go too far, much more on, I do want to also just touch on a little bit more why the story was actually created, why the character was created, why all that stuff. Obviously, I touched on what was going on in comics that led to it, but I want to touch on more specifically because I think his creation wasn't just about making another superhero. It reflected what creators and publishers thought readers really wanted during the Golden Age. And I think it's very fascinating, if not as fascinating as the comics themselves in some cases. But like I said, by 1939, Superman had become a phenomenon. Rather than copying Superman exactly, editor Roscoe Kent Fawcett wanted a hero that would appeal directly to children. Hence, us getting Billy Batson. Writer Bill Parker first imagined a team of 6 heroes, like I said. and ended up breaking it down to one hero with the 6 abilities, basically. C.C. Beck arguably shaped the character more than anyone else. Beck disliked overly realistic superhero art. Instead, he created rounded faces, simple designs, expressive emotions, bright, optimistic settings. His philosophy was the simpler the artwork, the easier it is for readers to imagine themselves in the story. That's one reason that Golden Age Captain Marvel still feels unique today. You can go back and read those comics, and they're still very entertaining. And then Otto Binder introduced just about everything else that was added to the series in the initial of it. Mary Marvel, Captain Marvel Jr., Black Cat, and Mr. Mind, Monster Society of Evil, and then many magical and science fiction elements that went on to just stick with the character or be part of the mythos. He transformed the series from straightforward superhero adventures into imaginative fantasy. Without Otto Binder, Captain Marvel probably would just be a legend. He wouldn't have continued on. He wouldn't have been able to continue to the modern day like the greatest heroes have. The obvious inspiration is obviously Superman. Both heroes fly, wear capes, have incredible strength, protect innocent people. But the more important inspiration wasn't Superman. It was children's wish for fulfillment. Superman is an adult pretending to be ordinary. That's the basis of what Superman is. Captain Marvel is an ordinary child pretending to be an adult. That's a completely different fantasy than Superman. Children didn't want to imagine being Clark Kent or being working at the Daily Planet. They wanted to imagine being Billy Batson. They wanted to imagine being able to say one word and turning into the strongest being in your universe. And like I said earlier, obviously the stuff with Billy was revolutionary. Taken serious by the other people in the universe depended on how Billy behaved as Shazam. And Fawcett would go on to have other superheroes too. Obviously, with the death of Fawcett Comics, at least their superhero stuff, that was the end of it, and basically they all ended when Captain Marvel ended. And Captain Marvel was obviously the most important one or most popular one, but there were a couple other ones. They had Spy Smasher, who's one of Fawcett's most respected heroes. Unlike Captain Marvel, he has no superpowers. He's an expert pilot, detective, inventor, master of disguise. He fought spies, saboteurs, the Nazi agents during World War II. Many comic historians consider him one of the best non-powered heroes of the Golden Age. There's Bullet Man and Bullet Girl, one of Fawcett's signature superhero teams. Bullet Man is scientist Jim Barr invented a gravity-defying bullet helmet, super strength, and flight. Bullet Girl, Susan Kent, Jim's partner and later wife, wore the same technology, fought crime beside him instead of acting as a sidekick. They were among comics' earliest husband and wife superhero teams. There's Ibis the Invisible, probably the second most popular Fawcett hero after Captain Marvel. An ancient Egyptian prince, he wielded the magical Ivy stick, which could make almost anything happen if he commanded it to. His adventures mixed Egyptian mythology, fantasy, magic, and monsters. He later crossed over with Captain Marvel on several occasions. There's Mr. Scarlet, one of the earliest masked detectives. Lee Travis fought crime wearing a red costume. His young partner, Pinky, was unusual because he wasn't just comic relief. He actively fought alongside Mr. Scarlet, which this didn't really happen at the time. Later, obviously, in DC Comics, this would happen, like with the Robin specifically, and then other heroes later on. These characters would later be revived by DC Comics, Mr. Scarlet and Pinky. There's Minuteman, a patriotic World War II hero, real name Jack Wetson. He gained enhanced strength through scientific experiments. He battled spies, saboteurs, enemy soldiers. Like Captain America, he reflected wartime patriotism through he debuted independently. There's a couple other ones. Golden Arrow, a Western hero. Instead of superpowers, he relied on expert archery, horseback riding, quick reflexes. He was one of the earliest comic book archers, even earlier than Green Arrow, Hawkeye, anything of that nature. And the last one we'll talk about is Captain Midnight. Originally a famous radio character, Fawcett adapted him into comics. He was an inventor, pilot, adventurer. Although he wasn't created by Fawcett, they made him one of the biggest comic stars at that time. So like I said, they had a whole bunch of list of characters, and then there were a decent amount of characters that just never got brought over by DC from Fawcett when they I don't remember if it's actually they bought them or how it works. I'm pretty sure they bought them. But quite a few characters were either never brought into DC continuity at all, or they were brought over only briefly and never became part of Shazam's regular supporting cast. DC mainly focused on preserving the Marvel family and their core villains while leaving many of the Fawcett creations just kind of in. The characters that DC fully kept, these became regular parts of the Shazam mythos, is Billy Batson, Captain Marvel obviously, Mary Marvel, Captain Marvel Jr., the Wizard Shazam, Black Adam, Dr. Savannah, Mr. Mind, Talkie Tawny, Uncle Marvel, King Null. Uncle Marvel is basically just a guy that doesn't have any powers that thinks he's part of the family. King Cole, Mr. Adam, and then the 7 deadly enemies of man, later reimagined as the 7 deadly sins. They are still considered core Shazam mythology today. Major Fawcett heroes that were left behind. These characters came over to DC legally, but they were never folded into the Shazam mythos. Spy Smasher, probably the biggest example. He was one of Fawcett's most popular non-powered heroes. After DC acquired him, he appeared in a few stories, later joined teams like the Freedom Fighters, but almost never interacted with Billy Batson. He essentially became his own separate DC character. Bulletman and Bullet Girl, another major omission. Originally, they were among Fawcett's biggest superheroes. DC occasionally featured them in Crisis on Infinite Earths, Infinite Crisis, as just kind of, but they've never became regular Shazam supporting characters or DC characters. Ibis the Invincible is one. This one's especially surprising. Me, Ibis used magical powers similar to the tone that Shazam's mythology was. Many fans expected him to become a regular ally. Instead, a handful of revivals, occasional Justice Society appearances, but very little interaction with Billy and very little interaction with DC in general. Considering both characters are rooted in ancient magic, it's kind of a missed opportunity in my opinion. I think he was a really cool character they also could have done some more stuff with. There's Minutemen, or Minuteman, one of Fawcett's patriotic World War II heroes, like I already mentioned. DC acknowledged he exists, but he is very rarely used. And like I said earlier, Mr. Scarlet and Mr. Pinky were both brought into DC. These characters have made scattered DC appearances over the years, however, they've never become part of Billy Batson's world. And a couple other heroes that also didn't appear are characters such as Golden Arrow, Phantom Eagle, Commando Yank, and Masterman. Have appeared little, if at all, in modern DC continuity. Some have only shown up in nostalgia stories or brief cameos. And then a couple of the villains that never really came over. This surprises probably me the most with some of these villains. DC has only consistently kept a handful. The major survivors were Dr. Savannah, Black Adam, Mr. Mind, King Cole, and Mr. Adam. Almost everyone else faded away. Examples include Captain Nazi, used occasionally but far less than the Fawcett era. That one you can kind of understand. Mr. Banjo, the Weeper, the Ghost of Fear, Dr. Heishi, Nepo, Romulus, and the Black Rat. Many of these villains have either never appeared in modern continuity or have only been revived once or maybe twice. Then there's some Fawcett characters that DC just radically changed. They're just completely different characters than they were originally when they were made. Black Adam is one of those characters. Fawcett mostly a one of Ancient Evil champion. In DC, he's expanded into one of the publisher's biggest anti-heroes and occasional Justice Society member. Captain Nazi. In Fawcett, he's a recurring wartime supervillain. DC appears much after World War II, largely because his original concept is tied to the historical period. Talkie Tawny. Fawcett, he is a talking tiger in a suit. Modern DC is sometimes a magical tiger, sometimes a humanoid tiger, depending on the continuity. There's kind of several reasons why DC didn't bring over more. I think they did do a decent job bringing over a decent amount, but kind of several different reasons. Brand focus, for one. DC wanted readers to associate Shazam with Billy Batson and the Marvel family rather than dozens of unrelated Fawcett heroes. Crowded universe, DC already has a whole bunch of heroes who filled similar roles. For example, Batman occupied the detective niche, making someone like Spy Smasher just less distinctive or important. Many Golden Age villains were very tied to the 1940s also and didn't really translate very well, especially if you wanted to continue them into the modern day. I will say, I do think it is kind of a missed opportunity. DC never fully embraced the entire Fawcett universe the way it embraced other acquired publishers like Charlton or Quality. Originally, Fawcett had its own interconnected world, later called Earth S, where Captain Marvel, Ibis, Spy Smasher, Bullet Man, Bullet Girl, Minuteman, and others coexisted. After acquiring the characters, DC mostly centered on the family and left much of the larger universe just kind of unexplored. If developed the full Fawcett cast a bit more consistently, Billy Batson might have had a much broader supporting universe instead of relying primarily on the Marvel family and relatively small group of recurring villains throughout his stories. But obviously, if you did want to bring him to your universe and kind of keep him in universe, and like, I feel like a lot of younger people probably aren't aware that he wasn't originally a DC character. So I do understand it, but I do think it is a bit of a missed opportunity on their end because I feel like there's a lot they could have done with it. But we are going to touch on now just the two movies and just kind of how they and or compare to the original run of Shazam. Alrighty, so like I said, we're going to compare the two live action movies and then the live action TV show from 1974. I think this is a really interesting comparison because the three versions of the character have very different goals, but they are the same character. The original Fawcett Captain Marvel comics 1940 to 1953 were fantasy adventures aimed primarily at children. The two modern live action films, Shazam 2019 and then Shazam Fury of the Gods in 2023, are superhero coming of age stories with a strange emphasis on Billy's foster family. Strong, not strange. Sorry. And then the 1974 to 1976 TV series was a low budget Saturday morning show focused on teaching moral lessons rather than adapting the comic book storylines. Billy Batson in the original Fawcett comics, Billy is much younger, around 10 to 12 years old. He's an orphan who lives largely on his own, working as a radio reporter. He is extremely mature for his age because he's had to survive without parents for all of his life, basically. But he very rarely complains about it. In the 2019 and 2023 movies, Billy is older. He's about 14, 15. Instead of being a homeless newsboy, he's in a foster care system and spends much of the first movie searching for his biological mother. His emotional journey is about learning that family is the people who choose you, not just the people you're related to or that give birth to you. This is probably the biggest change from the comics originally in the movies, is the big focus on the foster family aspect of it. And then Captain Marvel or Shazam in the original comics, Captain Marvel feels like a separate adult. When Billy transforms, his speech changes, his confidence changes, sometimes his personality changes. Many Golden Age stories make it seem as though an ancient heroic champion is acting through Billy rather than Billy becoming this hero. In the movies, Zachary Levi, the guy who plays him, deliberately acts like a teenager trapped in an adult superhero body. He jokes constantly, he experiments with his powers. He acts exactly like Billy would in an adult body if he were to be transformed into an adult at the age of 14. This makes the movie or the transformation much more comedic rather than a big difference. The wizard, Shazam, the one that he got his name from, or his later name from, the wizard Shazam dies almost immediately after giving Billy his powers in the comics. Most later guidance comes through magical visions or later stories. Billy spends most adventures figuring things out by himself. In the movies, the wizard survives much longer. He directly trains Billy. He remains an active influence on the mythology for some time to come. In the comics, Dr. Savannah, who, once again, I think was very ahead of his time. A lot of supervillains at the time of when Dr. Savannah was made weren't the most complex people, and they've made Dr. Savannah even more complex throughout the years. But even in the original comic book run, he's very complex, and there's a lot to the character. He's very interesting, intriguing. He's not just your typical A to B villain or like your Lex Luthor was back in his earlier days. Very dumbed down, not as true to his character that he is nowadays. Dr. Savannah wasn't very like that. In the comics, the original comics, Dr. Savannah is primarily a mad scientist. He builds robots, flying machines, giant weapons, strange inventions. He's brilliant, but he's usually humorous. In the 2019 film, they changed that almost completely. Savannah becomes much darker. His childhood rejection drives him. Instead of relying mostly on inventions, he gains magical powers from the seven deadly sins. He's far more tragic than his Golden Age counterpart, which I did think was an interesting way to go, but I don't know. I would have really liked to see a more accurate Dr. Savannah on the screen. He's always been one of the most intriguing villains, in my opinion, so the fact that he never really. They changed his story so much to try to make him more intriguing always kind of bothered me because he was so intriguing already. I felt it just felt unnecessary. And then we come to Black Adam. In the comics, or originally Black Adam appears only once during the Fawcett era. He's an ancient Egyptian champion who became corrupted by power and is defeated relatively quickly by Captain Marvel. In the modern films, they decided to make Black Adam not a Marvel villain. And I should state that in Captain Marvel comics, when he did come to DC, they used Black Adam quite a bit more and did make him a bit of an anti-hero type character, which he was not originally. So the movie definitely took a bit more inspiration on him being more of an anti-hero, but they just went the complete opposite way and just made him a hero. Black Adam's mythology is greatly expanded through in his own separate film rather than the two Shazam movies. Like I said, modern DC portrays him as a morally complex anti-hero instead of simply an evil predecessor. Like I said, I'd never. I think everybody would tell you that taking Black Adam's probably second most famous villain and making him not a Shazam villain just was kind of fucking retarded. That's like if you took, I don't know, Joker and just threw him in a Superman movie and had the Batman have nothing to do with it. It just doesn't really fit. Also, Superman would have no problem taking down the Joker. Anyway, now to the Marvel family. In the comics, the Marvel family grows gradually over the years. First Billy, then Freddy, then Mary. Each receives long introductions and their own adventures, their own character arcs. In the movies, by the end of the first film, nearly the entire roster family gains powers at once. It was inspired by later DC comics rather than the original Fawcett stories, in my opinion. Many longtime fans enjoyed seeing the full family together, but it's a much faster development than it is in the comics. I, for one, did not really like that, especially because I don't know. I think that was one of the biggest problems that the DCEU had in general is they always tried to put so much into these films, even though they were supposedly trying to build a universe. If you're literally trying to build a universe of movies that are going to cross over and expand like the MCU did, you don't have to shove every fucking storyline and story arc and thing you could possibly shove into every fucking movie. And I think that's the biggest fucking issue they already had. Why couldn't they have done just a Shazam movie in the first one and then probably not even done Dr. Savannah, if I'm being absolutely honest with you, just because I think they could have done Dr. Savannah better for one, and for two, I think they could have led Dr. Savannah could have been leading, or something could have been leading to Dr. Savannah. But whoever they ended up doing for the first movie, they could have done the first movie, had them show off Shazam, and that movie was pretty popular. I think it would have been even more popular if they did it correctly. And then the second movie, which wasn't very popular, Fear of the Gods, which I don't really even remember what the fuck happened in that movie, introduced Dr. Savannah and or Black Adam if you'd prefer that, but clearly they didn't fucking prefer that. They didn't even want Black Adam in the goddamn Shazam universe. Introduce Dr. Savannah and have something lead to Freddy getting injured. Freddy was injured in the first movie. I don't think Freddy should have already been a crippled because in the comic books he gets crippled, leading to his powers, and he stays crippled once he has the powers, which made him one of the first crippled superheroes, which I thought was important. Not that he's still not a crippled superhero, but I think it would have been more impactful to Billy's story to see have his best friend get injured in front of him and become crippled. I think that would have been very impactful. So I think they should have done that. Had Billy or have Freddy get hurt in the second movie, have him get the powers, have introduce Captain Marvel Jr., and then you still wait on Mary Marvel. You don't got to introduce her yet. You could wait for the third movie or a separate movie down the line. They could have done all of this shit so much better, but they just never do. The tone of the original comics is very whimsical. One issue might include dragons, talking tigers, aliens, fairy tales, comedy, giant robots, all in the same adventure. The stories embrace imagination very well. In the films, they balance comedy with emotional drama. The first movie especially focuses on Billy learning responsibility and accepting his foster family. The second leans further into fantasy with Greek mythology. The action's also a bit different. In the original comics, Captain Marvel rarely wins simply because he's stronger. He often succeeds through kindness, cleverness, and or just moral character, or being a moral character. In the movies, the action is much more typical of a modern superhero blockbuster with larger scale visual effects and extended battles that are just kind of the same after a while. Mr. Mind. Comic readers know that Mr. Mind is one of Captain Marvel's greatest enemies. In the movies, he's only teased in the mid-credit scenes and of the first film and never becomes the main villain. That means one of the classic Fawcett storylines, the Monster Society of Evil, hasn't yet been adapted. Which be honest, I don't think they're gonna adapt that unless they redo Shazam for the DCU at some point, which I don't see them doing anytime soon. I don't see we're really gonna be able to get the Shazam and Marvel family adapted properly. But that's another one they could have done. Say you still wanted to do Dr. Savannah in the first movie, you could have done Mr. Mine in the second movie. And the end credit scene would have led directly into that. That would have been good. And still had Freddy get hurt, Freddy do that, and then that also would have led into the Monster Society of Evil, so you already would have had a setup for a third movie. I think the biggest difference is the original comics are fundamentally about a child who is already good being entrusted with incredible power. The movies ask a different question. Can a troubled teenager become worthy of that power? Both approaches work, and we know that because the first movie did do very well, and that was a arguably pretty well received interpretation of that character. But they're telling very different kinds of stories. Now talking or jumping to the 1974 to 1976 TV show, the Filmation TV series is probably the most different adaptation of all of them. It ran for 28 episodes over 3 seasons on CBS and later became part of the Shazam ISIS Hour. Billy Batson, instead of being a radio reporter or foster kid, Billy travels across America in a motorhome. He's accompanied by an older called Mentor, who replaces the wizard Shazam for most of the series. Mentor teaches Billy life lessons and sends him to help people. This was done partly because of the producers wanted an adult guide in every episode. I don't really know why. The entire part of point of the character was that was very stupid. Captain Marvel is portrayed as a straightforward adult superhero. Unlike the movies, he doesn't consistently act like an excited teenager. He's calm, confident, almost like Superman. This is actually a lot closer to the Golden Age comic books than the new movies were, which I did think that was a good thing to do. One of the biggest things that surprises me going back and checking this show out as much as I could is that there's no supervillains. There are almost no comic book supervillains at all. Billy usually helps ordinary people dealing with problems like bullying, greed, dishonesty, peer pressure, unsafe behavior. Captain Marvel only appears when super strength is needed. This was because Filmation wanted the show to be educational as well as entertaining. It was supposed to be very much aimed towards younger children. There's a lot of characters who just did not appear in the TV series or just were left out from the TV series that were in the mythology. We have Mary Marvel, Captain Marvel Jr., Dr. Savannah, Mr. Mind, Black Adam, the Monster Society of Evil. For comic fans, this makes the world feel a lot smaller, obviously. The character that you know so well and know what's in their ginormous universe, half of that universe, if not more, is just gone. Not interested in adapting it. The wizard is essentially just replaced by the mentor, like I said, who serves as Billy's guide on the road. This makes the show feel more like a family adventure series than a fantasy epic, which I thought that was another mistake. The tone's a bit different. The show is very wholesome and optimistic. Every episode ends with Billy learning a moral lesson. It has much more in common with an educational family television show of the 1970s than any really modern superhero film or just really even modern comics at that time. Looking at it objectively, if you're looking for the spirit of the original Fawcett stories, the personality of Captain Marvel in the 1974 TV series is actually probably the closest. The fantasy and the mythology of the movies is definitely the closest. Billy Batson's original around very honestly. Neither one of them really adapted it very close. The homeless newsboy radio reporter from the Fawcett comics has never been faithfully adapted to a live action story. And then the Marvel family, the 2019 movie captures obviously just the fact that they fucking exist. So that's just no doubt is gonna be better. But even then, I don't necessarily think they did that the best way they could have. They could have done it slower, which would have. Sorry, I don't know what the fuck's on my phone. They could have done it slower, which basically would have just got you able to invest into the other characters faster and left you more to tell in the future movies. The original Fawcett comics remains the most whimsical version of the characters. They freely mix mythology, fairy tale, science fiction, comedy, and superhero action in a way that really neither the TV series nor the movies have fully been able to recreate. And I'd argue that even DC Comics haven't fully been able to recreate the magic of the original Captain Marvel comics. But obviously, that is very much an opinion based kind of thing. If you like the way they went with Captain Marvel as a character in DC Comics, there's nothing really wrong with that. I know that there's a lot of younger people who just wouldn't know or even be aware that DC didn't create the character. So I do want to talk about, not in grave detail, but just what DC did do with the character after getting him. Obviously, a couple of the just major plot points and storyline, story mythology based stuff that they actually changed that I argue might be for the better or the good or the worst. So we'll jump into that real quick. So like I said, we are quickly just going to run down stuff that DC had changed since bringing Captain Marvel over. Obviously, straight off the gate, the biggest change was Billy was no longer living in his own universe. In the original Fawcett comics, Captain Marvel had his own world, Superman didn't exist, Batman didn't exist, Wonder didn't exist. When DC brought him back in Shazam number 1, 1973, they initially explained that Billy came from Earth S, one of DC's parallel Earths. This allowed Captain Marvel to meet Superman without rewriting his original adventures. The name problem was a big one. This wasn't really a story change, but it became one. Originally, the hero's name was simply Captain Marvel. However, Marvel Comics now owned the trademark for Captain Marvel as the title of a comic, so DC had published his books under Shazam. For decades, this confused readers. Billy still transformed into Captain Marvel, but the comic was called Shazam. Only in 2011, with the New 52 reboot, did DC officially rename the hero Shazam in the stories, which they just should have done in the when they started making them. That's the dumbest shit I've ever fucking heard. And so much that I was under the impression they did until I went back and was looking through my notes and going back and reading stuff. I was like, what the fuck? Many longtime fans still prefer Captain Marvel. I don't think that's a very cool name, mainly because there is another one, especially now. It just seems unnecessary. Billy's personality changed a bit. Billy was almost unbelievably good. He rarely got angry. He was honest, responsible, almost perfect. DC gradually made Billy more realistic. He became stubborn and emotional, sometimes rebellious, less confident. By the New 52, Billy starts out as an angry foster kid who has to grow into being a hero. This is probably the biggest personality change DC ever made. Very much what the live action movies took representation from. Originally, Captain Marvel, his personality was a bit different too. Often felt like an adult hero. When Billy transformed, his speech changed, his confidence changed. Sometimes it almost felt like another person. Modern DC changed this. Now Shazam basically acts exactly like Billy. He jokes, acts immature, makes mistakes. Many readers love this. Others miss the wiser adult hero from Fawcett Comics. I am in the latter. I prefer it to be changed. Similar to Clark Kent and Superman, I think there should be a change. The Wizard dies almost immediately after giving Billy his powers in Fawcett Comics. Billy spends most stories on his own. In DC, the Wizard became much more important. He returns repeatedly. He teaches Billy, acts like a mentor. His backstory becomes much larger. The Rock of Eternity also becomes central to DC's magical universe. The Rock of Eternity is obviously what gave Billy his powers. Or, it's complicated. Black Adam, this is the biggest, in my opinion, changes that DC made. Originally, Black Adam appeared in just one Fawcett story. He was simply the evil previous champion. DC transformed him into one of the greatest anti-heroes. I have mixed feelings about this. I do think he is a good anti-hero. I think he's been written very well. The way they've done it's very well. All of that. I just prefer him as a villain. I'm kind of the same with Venom. I think Venom's very cool as an anti-hero. I think they've done a lot of really cool stories with him as an anti-hero. Specifically, I thought Agent Venom is really cool when Flash Thompson's as an anti-hero, but I think Venom as a character should be a villain. He just looks like a villain, talks like a villain, should act like a villain. Same with Black Adam, in my opinion. He's the ruler of Kahndaq. Occasionally, he's in the Justice Society. Occasionally, Justice League. He's also a political leader. He's now arguably almost as famous as Shazam himself. Some people prefer him and don't even really think about him with Shazam. He does have his own story or a comic run and everything at this point. The Marvel family, originally Billy, Mary, Freddy, Uncle Marvel, each gained powers separately. Uncle Marvel didn't actually have any powers though. Modern DC expanded this enormously. Now Billy's foster siblings also became champions: Darla, Eugene, Pedro. The whole Foster family can transform. That never existed in the original Foster comics, obviously. Originally, Mary simply had powers similar to Billy. DC has reinvented Mary many times. She's been a hero, powerless, Black Adam's ally, corrupted, restored, leader of the family. She became much more complex than her Golden Age version. I do think that's something they did pretty well. I thought Mary did always just seem in the background in the original stories. Obviously, she was a background character, but still. So I do like that they gave her a bit more of a character and a character arc. Freddie Freeman, my favorite character in the Captain Marvel universe. Originally, Freddie was Captain Marvel Jr. He had his own costume, his own adventures. He remained physically disabled in his civilian form. Modern DC focuses more on Freddy's personality and friendships. His disability is still an important part of many versions, but he often shares the spotlight with Billy and the rest of the Shazam family rather than starring in a long solo adventure. The Seven Deadly Sins, they were originally called the Seven Deadly Enemies of Man. They appeared as symbolic statues. They weren't major villains. DC expanded them dramatically. Now they're physical monsters. They became recurring enemies. The 2019 movie uses them as the main threat. That's another fucking thing. Why put Dr. Savannah in a movie that he wasn't the main villain of? Because he wasn't. Dr. Savannah wasn't the main villain of that movie. The fucking Seven Deadly Sins were, which is stupid. Anyway, back to this. Black Adam's country in the original Fox comics, obviously they never really detailed that, never really expanded to that. Now DC created Kahndaq. Now this is one of the most important fictional countries in DC. Black Adam fights to protect it. Sometimes he's a dictator. Sometimes he's their greatest hero. Obviously, Mr. Mind was changed a bit too. DC kept the concept but made him much more frightening. He's now often portrayed as ancient, manipulative, and a mastermind behind huge comic events. The tone also shifted a lot in the actual stories themselves. Modern DC made the mythology more epic. Now stories involve the gods, the Rock of Eternity, ancient magic, the Council of Wizards, multiversal threats, multiversal travel. The sense of childlike wonder is still there, but it's mixed with a higher stakes and a lot of darker themes. Billy's home life also obviously changed. Modern DC made family the center of his story. Instead of asking what would a child do with incredible power, the story often asks, how does a child who has never truly belonged find a family? This change has defined most of Shazam stories since the 2011 reboot and is the foundation of the recent films. As much that I have talked about that they have changed, there is also a lot that they didn't change, that they did stick pretty main to the original source material. Despite all their revisions, the core of the character has remained remarkably consistent for more than 80 years. Billy Batson is still chosen because of his potential for goodness, not because he's the strongest. Saying Shazam still transforms him through magical lightning. His powers still come from legendary figures like Solomon, Hercules, Atlas, Zeus, Achilles, and Mercury. He remains one of DC's most powerful magical heroes, as he was in his own universe. At its heart, the concept is still about a child being entrusted with extraordinary responsibilities and powers. So while DC has expanded the mythology and deepened the supporting cast, and very much modernized Billy's personality and the central fantasy that Billy Parker, C.C. Beck, and Otto Binder created for the Fawcett in 1940. I think it's still very recognizable today, and I do think overall they've done a very well job with that character. Because they very easily could have done just what they did with basically the rest of the Fawcett characters and not really do anything with them at all. They, instead of doing that, they expanded the stories and the mythology to make it more interesting and keep it going for the last many decades without having to actually change the character too much, which I think is just, the character is still recognizable, and I think that's the most important part. Overall, I think Fawcett Comics made a very interesting character, a very cool character. I still don't think there's anything, even the new comics, that actually can stand up to just like the escapism that you can get just reading those old comics, how much of just a different world it brings you to, and you're just like, this is great. But DC has done a remarkable job with the character, and Captain Marvel or Shazam has been and probably for many years in the future will be one of the most popular characters because he's truly one of the most complex and intriguing characters they've created. He's different as much, even as funny as it is that they wanted to sue all that time for him being similar to Superman. He's very much his own character, and they did a very good job making such an intriguing character and having him be so different from other characters at that time. And even still to this day, there's not very much a character like Billy Batson and Captain Marvel. They did try it in Marvel when Captain Marvel was taken over by, I believe it was Captain Marvel. I think Captain Marvel, that's actually funnier. Captain Marvel was taken over by a Hulk's friend. Fuck, I can't think of his name now, but the kid from the original Hulk stories. Obviously, that was a little similar, but that never really got too popular. But anyway, that's enough yapping. I truly hope you guys enjoyed the breakdown of the original Fawcett Captain Marvel comics. I really enjoyed it. I'm truly happy that the character has been able to stand the test of time and stay probably not in the top 3 or 4 or 5 characters at DC, but he's still so truly popular, and the is because he's been able to continue. He's had runs. I don't remember. I could actually probably look it up, but he hasn't not had a run, ongoing run, probably since he came back, which is not a small feat. Hulk and Thor, for example, very popular characters, have not really had that long of runs. Hulk's first run ended after 6 issues, and then when it came back, it went for a long time. But even then, after that run ended, he didn't get another long run until 20 years later, and that was only 115 issues. So that stuff happens all the time. So the fact that he was able to stand the test of time and continue and not really be out of print or out of publication at any point from the time he was bought by DC and the 20-year gap from Fawcett to DC after he was brought back and put into DC, he's never really been out of publication or out of print. And that is truly impressive. But that is enough of my yapping for one episode. I truly hope you guys enjoyed. This episode will be up on Spotify and on YouTube. I will be posting about it on Facebook and Instagram. So if you see those, go give those a share. Anything you can do. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your enemies about the podcast. That's how we grow and get bigger. I absolutely love every single one of you that have been listening on Spotify and on YouTube. YouTube has been killing it with the bonus episodes. I'm really glad your guys are liking those. The second part of the Hulk bonus episode is out right now, and I did want to let you guys know we are working on the third one, and the third and final one. So keep an eye out for that. I'm super excited, and I can't wait. So that is going to be all for this episode, though. My co-host Crypto the Superdog says goodbye, and this is me clocking out. Dr. Panel out.